Absolutely. Absolutely. Autism.
Absolutely autism.
Hi, welcome to Absolutely Autism. I'm Lisa.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Janelle, and today we're going to talk about breaking down terminology.
This topic is really important to me because when my son was first diagnosed, he was 2 and I was also a first-time mum. So I had a very basic understanding of what autism was, but I wanted to get more information. And I jumped on the internet, started to do some Google searching, joined some forums, some online chat groups, and immediately regretted it, mostly because they were very helpful, but they started to use very professional terms, medical terms, very common things in the autism world, and I had not yet learnt any of them. And so I felt very out of my depth, very overwhelmed, and found myself having to Google some of the words in someone's advice before I even looked into the advice itself. Sort of made me feel stupid and a bit like a failure, actually.
You're better than me, though. I didn't even bother. I saw these technical terms and I'm like, nah, too hard basket. There were things people would say and I'd be like, okay, I know what you're talking about. Reality was, I had no idea. And actually, I will admit that until last month, I didn't know what stimming was. But let's get started with some words.
Yeah.
How about we start with ASD?
Yes.
This is the one that you get told when your child is diagnosed, your child has ASD. So it's Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD. It's not a disease. Yes, disorder.
It's very common for children with ASD to have what they call sensory issues. It affects all the 5 senses of the body: touch, sight, smell, hearing, taste. I really forgot that one. Kids with sensory issues can be either hypo or hypersensitive to different things.
Which can also be known as sensory seeking or sensory avoidance.
Yes.
And you will notice those things as your kid's being diagnosed. Sometimes it can be they don't like the feeling of something on their fingers, sensitive to very loud noises, all things that come under the umbrella of sensory issues.
Meltdowns.
Ooh, meltdowns. We all know meltdowns.
Meltdowns, to be clear, are not tantrums.
Yes.
We will talk about that in a completely different video as well.
Meltdown, by definition, is a sensory overwhelming for the child. It is a complete overwhelming feeling that the child has no other way of expressing than to melt down. A tantrum is when the child is trying, or any person is trying, to enforce their own will.
But a meltdown is also where the child, their communication just completely shuts off. They no longer process what's being said to them or what's going on around them. They literally go into their own world of distress.
Now, my words that I didn't know, stimming.
Stimming, yes, that'll come up a lot when looking at getting your child diagnosed. And sometimes that can be one of the biggest keys or, red flag, so to speak, when your child's younger.
Stimming is a physical movement or vocal tic, anything done repetitively that the child uses to calm themselves down. So stimming can look like this. It can also
Be the very common flapping.
Yes.
Very common with ASD. The little bird flapping.
You might find too, and this is why I didn't know what stimming was, is they might not demonstrate any stimming. My son didn't. That's probably why I didn't know about it. But they generally are quite repetitive behaviours and...
Which is what makes them so obvious.
Yeah.
Scripting is generally where they have a favourite movie, or song, or TV show, and they will repeat that. They will repeat it word for word. Kids can still be classified as non-verbal if they're scripting and they're speaking the words that they know in sentence, but they can't answer you yes or no.
I did a bit of research on scripting because it's something that my son does a lot, and I found it interesting that scripting is very common for children who were previously completely non-verbal and it can be a stepping stone for them in learning to speak. It's their form of communicating without knowing exactly the right words to use. It can be that stepping stone, but then it can also be used, I've found as my son gets older, he still does some scripting. It can also be used as a coping mechanism in a social situation that they either feel uncomfortable in or don't understand. If they don't understand a question or if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed in a situation, they revert back to the scripting because it's comfortable for them, it's safe for them.
And they're still giving an answer, which is what the person speaking to them is expecting.
Yes.
I think my son too, he scripts a lot. He struggles to recognise emotions in himself, but he sees it in movies and TVs and goes, oh, I like that, I'll use that.
Yes. Yeah. Which is fake it till you make it, which is it's actually quite intelligent. And
Definitely.
can be quite funny sometimes too.
Yeah. Oh yes, they come out with...
the lines.
For a long time, all my son used to say to people was bananas in pyjamas. So whenever the girls would say good morning to him on the way to school, he would just reply with bananas in pyjamas. So that's quite cute.
My son, during his diagnosis, pretty much repeated the entire Toy Story to the doctors.
So if you ever need someone to do voiceover,
So I touched on non-verbal when I was talking about scripting and how kids that can still be classified as non-verbal even though they're spieling off whole movie lines. So non-verbal is basically the inability for the child to respond in an adequate manner to what is said or asked of them.
I imagine too, when it comes to non-verbal, you'd be relating that to frustration and aggression to some degree, because I feel as though those that are non-verbal, although they manage it as well as they can, there would be frustration, there would be aggression, because that is the way they communicate.
or in my son's case, that it sort of came down to, it caused anxiety.
Yes.
And it caused fear and lack of confidence as well, because they didn't know how to put himself out into that world and how to communicate and join in with things.
Let's talk about aversion. You have avoidance and then you have aversion. Aversion is something that children will definitely try to stay away from, and adults as well. So it can be sensory things like taste and touch and smell. They will do anything to just get away.
Fight or flight mode they go into.
Absolutely. Especially with ASD kiddos, you'll find that they'll have a lot of aversions to food, which we'll talk about later.
Aversions too can cause meltdowns.
Yes.
Probably most part it's the aversion that does cause.
Yeah, well, it's the anxiety from the fight or flight that sends them into that dysregulated state.
Regulated, regulation, dysregulated, unregulated, however you want to word it, it gets brought up a lot, and it is going to be an important part of your future with your child on the spectrum. What is regulation?
Sensory regulation. You have sensory tools, you have sensory items, you have sensory toys, you have sensory blankets, weighted blankets, and sensory noise machines.
Sensory chairs.
Yes.
Could go on forever.
These are all used to help regulate the child, and the regulation can be in different areas. It can be a sensory regulation where they're overwhelmed by certain things, or whether it's a regulation of mood. Maybe they're struggling with something and they need something to help them calm or get to a place where they need to be in that situation. You could look at it like a scale. You have a mood and a tool, and it helps to bring it in balance. It's important to help a child with autism regulate, because it helps them to function in a way that
Is proactive.
Keeping the mind and the body in sync with each other.
things that we find easy to do.
We self-regulate, and you'll hear that term as well. Self-regulation. Speaking of self-regulation, that's where therapies come in.
Ooh, therapies.
Yeah, therapies.
Welcome to the world of therapy.
Yes.